All right. We are here tonight studying about Mark 6. We're going to pick up where we left off last week. We finished the first 29 or 30 verses. We're going to pick up at verse 30 or 31 tonight, talking about the second half of Mark 6 and about what Jesus has done. You remember last week we talked about Mark 6 and we talked about how Jesus sent the 12 out. He sent them out to teach and to preach and to do miracles. And we talked about how he had done that. And then we also talked about how Herod had killed John the Baptist. But the important part for tonight is to remember that Jesus sent the apostles out. Remember, he sent them out 2 by 2. He sent them to various places, told them, don't take extra clothes, don't take extra shoes, don't take extra anything, don't even take money with you. But instead, you're going to go to these houses and people are going to house you. They're going to take care of you and you're going to depend on them. And so that's what we see the apostles do. And so we get into verse 30. And in verse 30, we begin reading there again about what the apostles have done. It says, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And when they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves, now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So what we see Jesus doing here, what is happening, is that the disciples have come to Jesus, and the apostles are coming to Jesus, the 12, and they're telling him about what's happened. They tell him about how they've healed people. They're talking about the demons they've cast out. They're talking about the lessons they've taught, how the people received it. And from Matthew and Luke and Mark's account, we can see that the disciples are very happy, very excited about this. They're amazed at what they were able to do. And so they've come to Jesus to tell him all that has happened. And they have come to tell him all this, but the problem is they're come, and as Jesus has continued to work his miracles, Jesus has become quite popular. We're going to see that in the rest of this chapter. And then you notice Jesus calls them and says, well, this is what we're going to, let's go away by ourselves. We're going to get in a boat, and we're going to go to a desolate place, a deserted place, and rest there. He's going to go to the side of the lake or the Sea of Galilee where nobody usually lives. There's nobody else around. There's just mountains, and they're going to have a time of rest. You know, as he says that they had so many people, and this tells us how many people were coming. There were so many people coming and going that they had no leisure even to eat. They were so busy with people coming and talking and wanting things and wanting to be healed and wanting to hear Jesus that the disciples had no time to even stop and eat. And so Jesus realizes they need to get away and they need to go find a place where they can rest and they can talk, and the apostles can basically get recharged and discuss with him what they wanted. Because remember, this is a trial run. This is a trial run preparing them for when Jesus himself will die and leave earth and leave the mission of the kingdom, leave the mission of the church in these men's hands. And they're going to do the very same thing they've been doing here. So this is what Jesus is doing. He wants to make sure these men know what they're doing and they've done the right thing. And so, you know, verse 32, they went away in a boat to a desolate place. They get in a boat and they begin to sail on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is a little deceiving to us because we hear sea and we think of the nearest body of water we have as far as what we call sea, is that it is, we picture it more like the ocean. It's not. The Sea of Galilee it can also be called a lake. Is a couple miles across. It's not a major body of water. It is a decent sized body of water, but it's not like the ocean or the Mediterranean Sea or one of those kinds of sea. And what it is the Sea of Galilee is so small that if the wind's not blowing, if it's a calm day, you can walk around the outsides of the Sea of Galilee and get there as fast as you can in a boat. Now, if the wind is with you, you can get there faster in a boat. But for most part, if the wind's not blowing, you can beat people on foot. And this is what we see happen here, is that the disciples and Jesus are in the boat and they are going across the sea to get away. But the people on the shore, they see where Jesus is, and they see his disciples, his apostles, and they're able to follow him. And not just some of them, there's a pretty large crowd we're going to see in just a second that follow him around. And not only do they follow him around, you notice right here, they run to the towns. They go to all the towns that are nearby and say, hey, Jesus is here. Jesus is here. We if you want to go see him, if you want to talk to him, if you want to do anything with him, we need to go. He's coming. He's here. He's on hand. And so this is what they're doing. They're following Jesus around the lake. Some of these people are walking on foot. They're following him around as him and his disciples are going across on the boat. And so they're racing to beat him, to see where he's going because they want to be with him. Then we pick up back to verse 34. And then when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. So here's what happens. Jesus and his disciples, they land where they're going. The crowds have already beat him there. And he gets there and he sees such a large crowd that you get this interesting reaction from Jesus. And instead of being upset or frustrated or angry at the crowds, he sees the shape the crowds are in. It says he has compassion on them. He feels sorry for them. His heart is rent because he wants them to have the knowledge they need. And again, you notice he says that he feels sorry for them because they're like sheep without a shepherd. They're like wandering sheep. They're just wandering around looking for someone to follow, looking for the great teacher, looking for someone who will lead them. And he realized they're just lost. And so this is why Jesus had compassion on them. Is because they were trying to find something. They were trying to find something amazing, something great, and they had found it with Jesus, and he didn't want to push them away. And that's why he calls them sheep without a shepherd. They were sheep. They were looking for a leader. They were looking for a guidance. They don't have that guidance at the moment. And so he began to teach them. And he begins to teach, and he teaches them many things. He begins to teach them about the kingdom. He teaches them all different parables, probably. We could imagine maybe something like the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5-7. Jesus had these discourses where he would preach for long times, and they would come and they would listen to him. And that's really the idea here. He begins to teach in verse 35. He teaches well into the day and into the afternoon. And it's beginning to get late. And as it gets to be late, his disciples come to him. And they basically tell Jesus, his apostles come and say, Jesus, we got a problem. He said, this is a desolate place. It's not very populated. And the problem is, he says, the hour's late, or they say the hour's late. They say, what are we going to do about food? You need to send these people to these surrounding communities in the countryside to go and buy themselves something to eat. Go tell them to go find something. They need to go buy their food because you're feeding thousands of people here, we're going to see in just a minute. And there's no food here. And even that, the point is that they are in a desolate place. They're in a place where there's not a town nearby. There's not a bakery or even a store that would have it, even a marketplace that could feed the thousands of people who are here. And the disciples are concerned because they know that what's going to happen is that these people are going to do one of two things. They're either going to starve, and if they starve, they're going to faint on their way home, or they're going to be restless and wanting food. But the disciples know they can't feed the thousands of people who are here. And so they come to Jesus, and their solution is, well, we'll just send them home. Go tell them to go back where they come from, and they'll find food along the way. They'll find food in the nearby village, and everything will be okay. Well, Jesus realizes that this is a problem. And that's what we see in the next verse. But he answered them, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they had found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. So Jesus tells them, the disciples come and say, you need to send them to the villages to get food. And Jesus says, no, you're going to feed them. You give them something to eat. Now, I think Jesus may be challenging his disciples of faith, his apostles' faith, in that they've just done these miracles. Now he's about to show them a greater miracle to have faith in him. And he's challenging their faith where he says, no, you're going to feed them. You're going to take care of these people. And the disciples are taken back in that next part of the verse where they say, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? Now, 200 denarii doesn't mean a whole lot to us. Now, 200 tells us that's a pretty good, probably good sum of money, but the denarii doesn't mean anything to us. A denarii is a average man's daily wages, is what your parents get when they go to work, what the pay they get for one day. Except in the ancient world, you didn't get paid by the week like we do now, where you get paid weekly or bi-weekly or even monthly. In the ancient world, you got paid daily. At the end of the day, you were to be paid because you had to go use that denarii, and that denarii would typically buy you a loaf of bread and a few other little things. And so they go and ask, can we buy over 200 loaves of bread and feed these people? If we have 200 denarii, and the thing about the 200 denarii is a pretty good sum of money. That's nearly 7 months of working. 7 months of working nonstop, not spending a dime anywhere else. And they say, how shall we feed these people with that much? Even we had 200 denarii, and then not even have the money, but to have a place to buy it from. Again, you can't go somewhere around here and buy something like that. It'd be about like going here where we're at and going down to Food Giant and saying, okay, I need to buy 200 loaves of bread. They're not going to have that. They may have quite a bit of bread, but they're not going to have that much. If you're giving smaller places, which where they're at was going to be, they wouldn't have had that kind of bread, especially this late in the day, because usually their bread, it lasted for the day and then you'd cook fresh in the morning. And so they say, how's this going to work? We can't give them that. And it says, even then, can we give it to them to eat? And so Jesus responds back to him, and Jesus asks him a question. He says, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. Go out into the crowd, go out among the people, and you find out how much bread and how much you've got in all these people. As you probably have figured out by now, this is the feeding of the 5,000. This is the feeding time that Jesus gives 5,000 people to feed this feast. And the apostles go out. Now, John tells us in John 6 that Andrew finds a little boy. They find a little lad, a little young boy who has 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, before you really overthink this, you got to understand the words here in the Greek versus English. And I usually don't want to try to bring out words in us, but for us and learning the stories. But I want you to understand what a loaf is. A loaf in this time, this word for loaf here is not a loaf like we would go down to Walmart or to Food Giant and buy a loaf of bread. You know, you go there and buy a loaf of bread, that bread will last you for a week or so, depending on how many sandwiches you got and how hungry you are. But it'll last for a little while. This loaves of bread was more like a muffin, maybe a little bigger. You got to understand, these 5 loaves and 2 fish were the lunch, the dinner, or a snack for this little boy. Now, it'd be about like us, and this is where I like to talk about this to relate to us. This would be about like Jesus today gathering us together and us having 5,000 people and him saying, okay, we need to feed somebody. Somebody says, oh, we got a Happy Meal. We got a Happy Meal that's designed for Elizabeth, Austin, Molly to eat, but not an adult, not to get full. And that's what they bring Jesus, is a Happy Meal. 5 little loaves. And the little loaves, again, are a little bit bigger than muffins, not much more than that. The fish is not 2 big catfish. It's 2 little, almost like a sardine, what we would have a sardine. If you've ever seen those sardines, I doubt any of us have eaten them, but you've probably seen the little tins those come in, or maybe you've seen somebody who eats sardines. A sardine is not just a little bitty fish, not big at all. And that's what this would have been. It would have been 2 dried out, or 2 dried, salted fish that were preserved, that will last a while. This is what Jesus gets. He has 5 loaves and 2 fish, excuse me. And they come, and then Jesus gives the command. He says, okay. He commands them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. He says, you all go sit down in groups. And they sit down in groups of 50s and 100s. They sit down in organized groups. What this is John will tell us, that he is actually, these people are actually getting ready to make Jesus king. They want Jesus to become the king. They're wanting to get an army ready. And so they get this army. That's what they're sitting in their army groups. And that's why we see in the next verse that we know how many men are here. Not men as general, but men as specifically. And that's what we're going to see in just 1 second in our next verse. We go from there to verse 41, where it says, "And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven. He looked up to heaven and said a blessing, and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men." Now, again, I told you the men there, and that 5,000 men is the word that means male. There are 5,000 males, not men as in general, but men specifically males. And so this tells us, now what this tells us, if there's 5,000 males, there's at least double that, if not triple that in total. There's probably at least 10, if not 15,000 people here that Jesus is feeding, counting women and children. So this is a huge thing Jesus is doing here. So he takes these little muffins, and he takes these 2 little fish, and he looks up to heaven and he says a blessing. He prays over the food. He asks God to bless it and thanks God for providing it. And then he begins to break these loaves up. And he breaks them up into little pieces, and they begin to pass these out before all the people. And he divides all this out, and the bread's given out, the fish is given out. And then the amazing thing about this whole story is verse 42, where it says, "And they all ate and were satisfied." The idea here is that they all ate and they were full. It's not that they ate just a couple bites to hold them over, but they were satisfied. They were able to make the 10-mile journey back home. Some of them had went 10 miles or so from where Jesus was before to now. They had a long journey back, and Jesus will make sure they were able to make it. And they ate and they ate and they ate. They were filled. And then not only they all filled, they notice in verse 43, there was even more left over. They took up 12 baskets. Now, this basket would have been what the Jews would have carried food in. They had these little baskets that they traveled with. Because remember, the Jews could only eat certain food. They had to eat kosher food. And so if they were traveling abroad, if they were traveling away from home, they would carry food with them to make sure it was kosher, make sure it was clean. And so they'd have these baskets. And some people think that these 12 baskets are actually the baskets that the apostles themselves would have traveled with. And so this very well could have been the food for the apostles for the next few days or few weeks. So Jesus was not just feeding the 5,000, he's also feeding the apostles. He's also taking care of those people who are with him. And so we end this account of Jesus feeding of the 5,000. The interesting thing about this miracle is, aside from the resurrection, this is the only miracle that's recorded in all 4 Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all record this miracle. No other miracle they record all the same. You have some that 2 will record, or three. There's some that's 1, but you only have this one miracle that Jesus performs on during his life that is recorded on all 4. And it's the only miracle outside the resurrection and all 4 will record. And so this makes it very important. And what this does is this begins to demonstrate and show us and show them that Jesus was there to take care of them. Jesus was there to look after and to provide for his feeding his people, and for his disciples, and also for those who are with him. All right, so now after this, that night, another interesting account happens. Verse 45. Verse 45, immediately he made his disciples to get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Now, let's go back here and talk about this. Notice it says again immediately, after Jesus has fed the 5,000 men, he's fed all the people, he tells his disciples, his apostles, to get into a boat. You go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. You go to this town called Bethsaida. Bethsaida was a port town in Galilee, as they would have known. And so he tells them to go while he tells the crowds to leave, to depart. And most likely the apostles think that what Jesus is planning on is that Jesus is planning to leave the people and do like the people did today. They're going to walk around the Sea of Galilee and make it to the other side, or he's going to meet them sometime tomorrow. We really don't know what they were thinking, but he told them to go in a boat and leave, and so he dismisses them. Then after he gets the disciples going, he gets the crowds going, notice Jesus goes up onto the mountain to pray. And this is not unusual for Jesus to go alone, go away from everybody, and have a time of prayer. And have a time that he would pray and he would speak to his Father. And again, you got to think that Jesus being the Son of God and all that he had went through to be to earth, his prayers were very special. His prayers were very important. He sometimes took hours to pray. There are records in the Gospels where he would pray all night long. That's something that we sometimes can't do because we just don't communicate that deeply with God. But Jesus was able to. And so he comes up and he goes and prays. And he knows he prays until the evening comes, so the dark comes. And he goes, and it's probably, some people speculate that it may be the full moon because it says that he's up on the mountain praying, and the dark comes, and he can look out on the water, and he can see their boat. And he sees their boat is out in the middle of the sea. Again, the Sea of Galilee was not big. Some tell us that they were about halfway. I think Matthew tells us they were halfway there, or halfway between Jesus and the other side, which is about 3 or 4 miles out. And so Jesus sees them. They're out at sea. He's alone on the land. And he sees them working, struggling in their ship. You notice verse 48. He saw they were making headway painfully, meaning they were having a hard time. The wind was against them. It wasn't cooperating. The weather wasn't not the best, so they're having trouble. And then you notice that they're having trouble getting across the Sea of Galilee. They're not moving very far. They've been up all day. They've traveled. They've had these people. They fed all these people. They're exhausted, and now they're having trouble at night. And so Jesus begins to decide to walk to them. Now, or I should say walk past them, because you notice what it says in verse 48. Jesus came to them walking on the sea. He meant to walk by them. Now, it says it happened, before we get there, it says it happened on the 4th watch of the night. 4th watch of the night is the hours from 4 to 6 a.m. So this has been early morning, what we would call early morning, that Jesus comes walking on the water. Another thing that tells us about this time that is probably going to be full moon is that the disciples are able to see him. He's able to see them, and they're able to see him. So that's not usual on typical nights unless it's a full moon. Full moons is a lot easier. So a lot of people think that may have been what happened here. And so Jesus came and he just walked on the water. This is that interesting thing, that interesting story here, that Jesus does something that no one else in Scripture has ever done. No one else will ever be able to do, and that is he walks on the water. He plainly walks on this water. Again, he walks on this water where it's probably 6-7 miles across, and the disciples are 3 miles out, and he walks to them. He takes off on the water and walks right across the water to them. And again, you notice that he means to go by them. He means to pass them by and not stop. But they see him in verse 49. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost. And again, you can understand this. If you're out in a boat, middle of the night, early morning, and you know how boats work, and you see a guy walking on the water, you've got to come up with a reason. You've got to come up with some kind of explanation for it. And that's what they do. And their best explanation is that this is a ghost, a phantasm. And so they cry out, it's a ghost. And they all saw him. They all look out. You know, sometimes when people say they see ghosts or see things, other people begin to doubt them and question them. And this one, you notice they all see it. It's not just one or two that see him, and they're trying to say, oh, well, you just saw something. No, they all see it. They all see Jesus, and when they see him, they're terrified because, again, they can't tell it's Jesus in the middle of the night. They can't tell that's him walking on water. They've never seen him do this. Never seen anybody do this. Their first guess is this is a ghost. And again, they were superstitious, like a lot of people can be, and they're terrified of it. And Jesus, being near them, realizes they're terrified of him, that immediately he speaks to them. He comforts them. He tells them, take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. He says, don't worry, no, guys, it's okay. It's just me. It's just me. It's I. And the idea of it is I is I am, meaning that he's showing he's God. This is one of that ability of him showing who he truly is. And what's interesting about this is that Mark doesn't tell us, Matthew does, that this is the point story where Peter comes out to join him. Peter goes out to walk on the water with him, and he falls into the water, and then Jesus picks him up, and Jesus has to carry him back to the boat. And then he knows verse 51, Jesus says he got into the boat with them. And when he got into the boat with them, the wind ceased. Now, remember, it says earlier, they weren't able to row and make it to the shore as easy because the wind was against them. They're having a hard time. Well, Jesus gets in there, and there's a couple of miracles wrapped up here. One, he's walking on water. Two, the water, the wind, the storm, the breeze ceases. So they're no longer having to fight the boat. Then John tells us about this miracle in John 6. Then he says that as soon as Jesus stepped into the boat was at the shore. Now, why that's a miracle is the last time we saw Jesus speak to them, they were in the middle of the sea. They were 3 or 4 miles out. And Jesus gets there, and they're at the seashore. These are all the things that Jesus is doing to prove to the disciples who he is, to show them who he really is. And then you notice verse 51, they are utterly astounded. They're just taken back. There's nothing they can say, no response they can make because of Jesus. Because they've just had a day where, as we would say, Jesus has blown their mind. Jesus has just went above and beyond. But the problem is, verse 52, for they did not understand about the loaves. They didn't understand about how Jesus could do that. They didn't understand the purpose of that miracle. And then they didn't understand what Jesus was able to do here. And all this leads their hearts to be hardened. And the idea here of hardened is not that they're hardened as in Exodus, where it talks about Pharaoh's heart's hardened that they won't listen, is that their hearts are not receptive all the way. They have seen this, they have realized what Jesus has done, but they don't realize who Jesus is. There is almost that denial that he is the Son of God, that this is proving he's the Son of God. And that's what all these miracles do. He's doing miracles that no one else has ever been able to do. No one else has ever thought about doing. And he's able to do them so easily that blows the apostles' mind, and they're not able to come up with a response. And so they're not able to process it. As a matter of fact, we're going to see as we progress to this gospel, they're not really able to process it until Jesus is dead, until after Jesus' life and the Holy Spirit reveals to them, hey, guys, this is what he did. This is to prove who he is. And so this is why Mark is writing this to tell us who Jesus is. Again, remember, Mark's writing was to prove who the Son of God was. And if Jesus did these things, and he has this authority over nature, and he has this authority to take the bread and walk on water and to calm the storm and all these things, then he has to be something special. And that special thing is the Son of God. And so Jesus gets to the other side. You notice we'll pick back up and we'll read these last few verses here. Verse 53, when they had crossed over, they came to the land at Gennesaret and moored there to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him. And they went about and ran about the whole region and began to bring the sick people on their beds to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he came, wherever he came, in villages, cities, or countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and implored him that they might touch even the fringe of his garments. And as many as touched it were made well. So Jesus and the disciples make it to the other side of the sea. Again, that miracle. And as soon as they're there, they moor the boat. They land the boat. They get out at Gennesaret. Now, this is the area Jesus was earlier. Remember, this is sort of the area where that the man with the legion, the many demons, was at, I believe. And so they get out of the boat, and when they get out of the boat, people recognize him. People see Jesus, and they begin to recognize who he is, and they begin to spread word. Hey, there's Jesus is here. Jesus is here. The miracle worker's here. And that's what they do. They begin to bring him sick people. And they take these people on their beds from wherever they are to Jesus. And this shows the faith of these people. The faith that they are willing to carry their sick loved ones, their sick friends, no matter the distance, as long as they can get to Jesus. And they go wherever they hear. If they hear Jesus is moving to the town, they follow him. And you notice that whenever he came into a city or a village or countryside, and then they knew he was there, they would line the streets with these sick people. And apparently they had gotten word around about what happened because, you know, they lay the sick in the marketplaces, and they implored, they begged, they pleaded with him that they might even touch the fringe of his garment. Remember the woman with the issue of blood, how it says that she touched the hem of his garment and she was well? That's what these guys are doing. This is what these people are doing. They're begging him. Just let us touch the edge of your garment. Let us just touch the tassels that hang off your garment. Let us just touch the little edge, and we'll be made well. And you know, as many as touched it were made well. Jesus goes, and anyone who touches him, anyone who is around him, begins to get this healing. And so what happens here is we begin to see that Jesus begins to get this reputation as being a healer, as being a miracle worker. And again, we're not told here, but typically when Jesus does this, he uses these opportunities of healing to teach. Because when he heals and he does stuff that no one else could do, that no one else has been able to do, no one else could come close to doing, then people are going to listen to him because they're going to say, hey, you know, this guy's something special. If this guy can do these miracles, then this guy must have something that important that he can tell us that I need to know. And so this is what we see with Jesus happens in Mark 6. That's the end of our study for tonight. Now, what can we learn about this tonight is that we can learn that Jesus is, again, the Son of God. He is that Son of God who did these very things. And see, that's one of the interesting things about the Bible, is that you either have to accept it for what it is, the Word of God, and accept it to be the true Word of God, and therefore Jesus is the Son of God, or you can reject it and say, oh, well, he's not there. It's just a bunch of made-up stories. Well, if they're made-up stories, the guys who made them, they did a great work. They thought of things that no one else has ever thought about before. They didn't copy other legends, but they told about the great things their God can do, their Savior can do, and they were willing to give their life for it. And to me, that tells me that these are not just good stories. These are not made-up fiction. This is a story of a real man who came to this world, who did great things, and did it for us. He did it for these 12 men to prove who he was, to show who they follow, so that they could in turn write these very books and they could tell the world. And not just tell their world, they could tell all the people who would come after, all the people who would hear. And then those people could develop their faith. They could develop their belief. They could develop their understanding of God. And they could come to the same faith that these apostles had. I thank you for joining us here tonight. I appreciate those who are here. We hope that you're having a good week. Next Monday night, we'll pick up at 7 o'clock, and we'll begin in Mark chapter 7. Again, I appreciate you for being here, and we hope to see you all again real soon.